According to recent assessments from Moody's, nearly one-third of the United States economy has officially slipped into recessionary conditions. This economic downturn is not some distant threat waiting on the horizon. It is already happening, and its effects are reaching communities across the nation right now. What we are witnessing is the result of a perfect storm created by three powerful forces colliding at the same time. A 20% surge in debt collection activity, rapidly falling home values that are erasing decades of accumulated wealth almost overnight, and state budgets that are being sustained more by hope than by financial stability. This video serves as a survival guide designed to help you understand where the risks are emerging first. We will reveal the 10 states that appear most vulnerable to the coming wave of economic disruption, giving you the information you need before the situation becomes even more severe. The state occupying the first spot on our list may come as a surprise because it has long been viewed as a symbol of wealth, growth, and opportunity. So let's find out which state we're talking about. We'll begin our countdown with number 10. At number 10, we have Colorado, a state famous for its breathtaking mountain landscapes and luxurious multi-million-dollar homes. Yet beneath that image of prosperity, a troubling contradiction has been quietly unfolding. Many residents now find themselves forced to dedicate nearly 46% of their actual income just to keep up with payments on an ordinary home mortgage. As economic conditions began to deteriorate, Colorado became one of the earliest states to feel the impact, largely because of its heavy dependence on the tech sector's rapid expansion. Home prices climbed to an average of around $570,000, while median household earnings remained closer to $92,000. This widening gap created a housing market that many analysts argue had become dangerously overinflated. During the pandemic years, developers and investors aggressively expanded, operating under the assumption that remote workers and highly paid technology employees relocating from Silicon Valley would continue arriving indefinitely. For a time, that strategy appeared to work. However, when major technology companies initiated widespread cost-cutting measures, hiring freezes, and mass layoffs, that optimistic narrative quickly unraveled. The consequences became especially visible in Denver, where office vacancy rates in the downtown area climbed above 31%, reaching levels never before seen in the state's history. The problems did not stop with commercial real estate. Over the course of a single year, foreclosure filings and property repossessions across Colorado surged by an astonishing 145%, creating additional pressure throughout the housing market. Meanwhile, many commercial property owners in Denver have found themselves making difficult decisions, reducing rental prices by as much as 40% in an effort to keep existing tenants from leaving. The image of endless prosperity that once defined Colorado's high-growth economy now appears far more fragile than many people previously imagined. Perhaps even more concerning is the financial burden looming in the background. The state's public pension system is carrying an estimated $35 billion in unfunded liabilities, creating long-term fiscal risks that continue to worry economists and policymakers alike. If you find this type of economic analysis helpful for understanding financial risks and protecting your investments, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss upcoming reports and market breakdowns. Imagine living in Greenville County and waking up one day to discover that the only rural hospital within a 50-mile radius has shut its doors permanently. This is not a fictional scenario or a warning about the future. It is a reality that communities across Mississippi are already confronting. As economic conditions continue to weaken, Mississippi is revealing a major structural weakness, an economic system that depends heavily on outside financial support to remain functional. With a median household income of approximately $49,111, roughly 60% of the national average, and more than 18% of residents living below the poverty threshold, the state's economic foundation was already under significant strain long before the current downturn. What makes the situation even more concerning is the state's reliance on federal funding. Nearly 46% of Mississippi's operating budget is supported by federal assistance programs. If economic pressures force the federal government to reduce spending, that financial support system could begin to weaken, creating ripple effects throughout the state's public services. The consequences are already becoming visible. 6 rural hospitals have closed, leaving more than 300,000 residents with severely limited access to emergency medical care and essential health services. It raises an important question. What happens when a state depends on decisions made hundreds of miles away to sustain nearly half of its public budget? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Should local governments rely so heavily on federal assistance, or does that create long-term risks that are difficult to manage? The challenges extend far beyond healthcare. Mississippi's limited industrial base makes it difficult for the state to generate sufficient economic momentum on its own. Without continued investment and external funding, existing infrastructure problems could become increasingly severe. Currently, nearly 28% of roads and bridges across the state are classified as being in deteriorating condition, creating additional concerns for long-term economic stability. What happens when the nation's lawmakers fail to approve a federal budget? For one neighboring state, the consequences could be immediate and far-reaching. Entire sectors of its economy could slow dramatically, exposing just how dependent they have become on government spending. This brings us to number 8 on our list, Maryland. Maryland's situation highlights a significant structural vulnerability, an economy that has become heavily tied to political decisions made in Washington. Despite its reputation as one of America's most highly educated and affluent states, Maryland faces a fundamental economic risk that cannot be ignored. For decades, the state has benefited enormously from its close relationship with the federal government. However, that relationship has also created a dangerous concentration of risk. With more than 28,700 federal positions located within its borders, Maryland has one of the highest levels of dependence on federal employment and spending in the nation. If budget cuts, spending freezes, or austerity measures were ever implemented on a large scale in Washington, the financial resources supporting significant portions of Maryland's economy could contract rapidly. That possibility raises an important question. Can an economy built largely around government expenditures remain resilient during periods of severe financial stress? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe economic systems that depend heavily on public spending are sustainable during major downturns? Or do they require a stronger foundation in private sector production and investment? Recent economic indicators have already begun to raise concerns. A combination of rising interest rates and declining household purchasing power has contributed to a 29% increase in foreclosure activity across Maryland. Meanwhile, in Baltimore, one of the state's primary economic centers, office vacancy rates have climbed above 22%, pushing commercial rental prices down to levels not seen in more than a decade. Another source of concern is the state's financial cushion. Maryland's Emergency Reserve Fund stands at approximately $2.9 billion, an amount that could be depleted relatively quickly if state revenues continue to weaken over an extended period. If you enjoy these in-depth analyses of economic trends and systemic financial risks, be sure to subscribe so you can stay informed about future market reports and exclusive financial investigations. Those alarming numbers are coming from Delaware, which takes the number 7 position on our list. The state is currently confronting a major challenge to the economic model that supported its prosperity for decades. As economic conditions continue to weaken, Delaware's long-standing status as a corporate haven is facing pressures unlike anything seen in recent history. For generations, Delaware built a significant portion of its economic success by attracting corporations seeking favorable legal structures and tax advantages. In many ways, the state operated less like a traditional economy and more like a specialized financial and corporate services hub. This strategy proved highly successful for many years. However, even the most effective economic models can face disruption over time. As states such as Texas and Florida introduced increasingly competitive tax policies and business incentives, Delaware began experiencing a gradual but significant loss of its competitive advantage. What started as a slow shift eventually evolved into a broader migration of corporate activity. The financial consequences have become increasingly difficult to ignore. Corporate tax revenue, which accounts for nearly 30% of Delaware's state budget, has reportedly fallen by approximately 14%, representing one of the sharpest declines the state has experienced in the last 2 decades. This raises an important question. Is it too risky for a government to build such a large portion of its financial foundation on the continued loyalty of major corporations? Share your perspective in the comments below. Can a state remain financially secure when so much of its revenue depends on decisions made in corporate boardrooms? As revenue from business activity declines, the financial burden inevitably shifts toward residents and local taxpayers. Delaware's budget deficit has now reached levels equivalent to roughly $1,150 per resident, creating additional pressure on public finances. At the same time, rising living costs and economic uncertainty have contributed to growing household financial stress. Credit card delinquency rates in Delaware have climbed to approximately 6.3%, among the highest levels in the Mid-Atlantic region. Meanwhile, foreclosure filings have surged by nearly 27%, adding further strain to the housing market. At number 6 on our list, we arrive at a state facing a different but equally troubling economic reality, one where the resource once referred to as black gold has transformed from a source of prosperity into a major financial vulnerability. Picture the sound of powerful winds moving through aging pine forests as snow blankets abandoned homes in layers of Arctic white. Along a deserted roadway, a weathered sign advertising homes at an 18% discount sways in freezing temperatures. This isn't a scene from a dystopian film. It is a glimpse into the economic challenges confronting parts of modern-day Alaska. As economic pressures intensify, Alaska's heavy dependence on oil revenues has become increasingly apparent. For decades, petroleum income has provided roughly 40% of the financial resources needed to support state government operations. That model worked effectively when energy markets were favorable. However, it also created a significant long-term risk. According to state budget estimates, Alaska requires oil prices of approximately $76 per barrel to maintain fiscal balance. Yet crude oil prices have remained closer to $71 per barrel for an extended period, creating persistent budgetary pressure. As energy revenues declined below sustainable levels, state leaders faced difficult choices. One of the most controversial measures involved drawing from the state's permanent fund, a financial reserve that for generations symbolized Alaska's long-term economic security and future prosperity, in order to help cover current government expenses and payroll obligations. This raises an important question. When a government begins relying on savings intended for future generations to finance present-day operations, does that signal a deeper structural problem? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The consequences of limited economic diversification are becoming increasingly visible throughout the state. One example is the growing cost of living crisis. In some regions of Alaska, the price of a single gallon of milk has climbed to approximately $7.50, illustrating the extraordinary expenses faced by residents. At the same time, economic opportunities have become more limited, contributing to a sustained migration trend. For the past 3 years, more than 12,000 residents annually have relocated out of the state in search of employment and lower living costs elsewhere. This population decline has created additional pressure on the housing market. As more homeowners attempt to sell their properties, housing inventory levels have increased by roughly 32%, producing an increasingly oversupplied real estate market. The state occupying the number 5 position presents an even more complicated and troubling picture. Here, economic vulnerability is being driven not by a single problem, but by the convergence of several major risks: dependence on volatile energy markets, heavy reliance on federal funding, and persistent social challenges. Let's take a closer look at one of the most surprising cases on our list. A market analyst recently summarized the situation with a striking observation. We once believed we had discovered an overlooked investment opportunity, only to realize we were investing in an economy sustained largely by subsidies and optimism. That statement captures much of the concern surrounding the current situation in New Mexico. When an economy simultaneously depends on unstable energy revenues, government support, and fragile social conditions, the margin for error becomes extremely small. In many ways, New Mexico's economy is being supported by two foundations that are both highly vulnerable to external shocks. Approximately 43% of the state's budget is tied to federal funding, while nearly 30% of its economic output is connected to the oil and gas sector. As energy prices weakened and market conditions cooled, state revenues from oil royalties reportedly declined by about 18%, creating budget shortfalls that approached $900 million. To put that into perspective, imagine a household that suddenly experiences both a significant pay cut and the loss of financial assistance from family members at the same time. That analogy illustrates the type of financial pressure New Mexico has been confronting. Compounding these economic challenges are concerns about public safety and social stability. With violent crime rates reported to be substantially above the national average, many businesses and outside investors may become more cautious when considering long-term investments in the region. The effects have become increasingly visible in the housing market. Foreclosure activity in New Mexico has reportedly doubled within a single year, while in major metropolitan areas such as Albuquerque, housing prices have declined by approximately 9% as economic uncertainty has intensified. At the same time, broader socioeconomic indicators continue to raise concerns. Poverty rates remain elevated at around 18.4%, and unemployment among younger workers has exceeded 9%, creating difficult circumstances for many residents attempting to establish long-term financial security. The state ranked number 4 presents a striking contrast between appearance and reality. On the surface, it is known for glittering casinos, world-famous entertainment venues, and an image of endless prosperity. Beneath that glamorous exterior, however, lies an economic structure that many analysts consider increasingly fragile. More alarming still, this state currently holds one of the most concerning financial records in the nation. For every 326 homes in Nevada, one property has entered foreclosure proceedings. This statistic has placed Nevada at the top of the United States in foreclosure rates, highlighting the severity of the pressures facing its housing market. Nevada's position on our list reflects the vulnerabilities of an economy heavily dependent on discretionary consumer spending and rapid real estate expansion. During periods of economic growth, this model generated enormous wealth. But when economic activity slows and consumers become more cautious, the weaknesses of that structure become much more visible. The state's economy operates differently from many others. A substantial portion of its prosperity depends on visitors from other states spending money on entertainment, tourism, conventions, and leisure activities. As economic uncertainty spread and households across the country reduced discretionary spending, luxury vacations and major business events were among the first expenses to be cut. The impact became apparent through a reported 15% decline in conference and event bookings, dealing a significant blow to one of Nevada's key economic engines. At the same time, tax revenues generated by casinos and entertainment venues, which support approximately 42% of the state's operating budget, fell by around 8%. This situation raises an important question. When a government's financial health depends heavily on consumer confidence and discretionary spending, how resilient can that system remain during a prolonged economic downturn? Share your perspective in the comments below. Yet the most serious concerns may lie within Nevada's housing market. In just 1 year, residential property inventory increased by nearly 45%, largely due to weakening demand and a growing number of homes entering the market. Meanwhile, the state's unemployment rate climbed to approximately 5.4%, adding further pressure to households already struggling with rising expenses. For many residents, mortgage payments now consume more than 43% of their household income, creating significant financial strain. What was once celebrated as America's premier destination for entertainment and opportunity is now facing the possibility of becoming one of the earliest and most visible casualties of economic contraction. At number 3 on the list, the situation becomes especially dramatic in Florida, where shifting economic pressures are converging into what many describe as a broad financial slowdown. The imagery alone is striking. Strong coastal winds sweeping through high-rise luxury buildings in Miami, shaking floor-to-ceiling glass, while a single homeowner's insurance bill lands on a marble floor, symbolizing a much larger structural shift in the housing market. This is not just about fluctuating property prices. The deeper issue lies in rising hidden costs, unstable insurance markets, and a sharp reversal in migration trends that once fueled the state's rapid growth. For years, Florida's economic expansion functioned almost like a large-scale asset redistribution system. The model depended heavily on continuous inflows of wealth, as new residents from other states purchased homes and invested in real estate. That steady demand helped drive prices upward and supported local development. However, over time, a less visible risk began to accumulate. A significant portion of the country's most overvalued housing markets, reportedly 9 out of the top 15, are now concentrated in Florida. When combined with increasing exposure to hurricanes and natural disasters, the financial pressure on homeowners has intensified significantly. This situation has been further complicated by the retreat of major insurance providers. Companies such as Farmers and AAA have reduced or withdrawn coverage in certain areas, making it increasingly difficult and expensive to secure property insurance. As a result, the true cost of homeownership has risen far beyond what many families originally anticipated. In some cases, affordability calculations suggest that the income required to comfortably sustain a home far exceeds what many residents actually earn, with insurance premiums alone reaching more than $1,000 annually, several times higher than the national average. This raises a difficult question. Would you personally accept such ongoing costs to maintain ownership of a property that may not be appreciating in value? Share your thoughts below. As living expenses increased, Florida's once strong migration boom began to slow sharply. Annual net migration reportedly fell from around 222,000 people to just over 68,000, signaling a major shift in momentum. At the number 2 position on our list, we arrive at California, a state now facing what is described as the largest budget deficit in its history. In order to keep essential public services running, state authorities were reportedly forced to withdraw around $12 billion from reserve funds just to maintain basic operational stability. As broader economic pressures intensify, California is confronting a combination of structural challenges, including business departures, rising tax burdens, and increasing strain on public administration systems. Together, these factors are contributing to a growing sense of financial instability across the state. For decades, California's economic strength has been closely tied to Silicon Valley and its technology sector. However, when profitability in the tech industry declined, tax revenues fell sharply, by approximately 21%, removing one of the state's most important sources of income. At the same time, a mix of high taxation levels and strict regulatory environments has encouraged some corporations, including Fortune 500 firms, to relocate operations elsewhere. This gradual shift has added further pressure to the state's economic foundation. What has emerged is a negative feedback loop. As businesses and high-income earners leave, tax revenue declines, which then forces the government to either raise taxes or reduce public services. Both outcomes can accelerate further departures, reinforcing the cycle and deepening financial strain. The consequences of this dynamic are becoming increasingly visible in housing and cost of living indicators. The average home price in California has reached approximately $825,000, requiring an estimated household income of around $237,000 to afford comfortably. In contrast, median household income sits closer to $96,500, highlighting a significant affordability gap. This imbalance has contributed to one of the largest domestic migration losses in the United States, with more than 239,000 residents reportedly leaving the state in a single year. Meanwhile, commercial real estate has also come under pressure, with high-profile properties experiencing sharp declines in valuation. One example often cited is a major Los Angeles office tower, once valued at around $632 million, now assessed at closer to $200 million. As a result, California's fiscal outlook is increasingly defined by widening deficits and economic tension. Yet despite these challenges, the scale of the state's economy remains significant. At the number 1 position on the list, the most severe situation unfolds in New Jersey, where an emergency report from state auditors has revealed deeply concerning financial conditions. According to the findings, the state is operating with what is described as only a 2-day reserve of available funds for essential government operations, placing it at the lowest level of financial cushion in the entire United States. This situation points to a much larger issue: a growing imbalance in pension obligations and government reserve systems that some analysts describe as a near mathematical breakdown of fiscal structure. To maintain daily operations, the implied burden per resident is estimated at approximately $44,500 in state-level obligations. Over a prolonged period, New Jersey's fiscal strategy has relied heavily on borrowing and pension fund adjustments to cover ongoing expenditures. This approach has contributed to the accumulation of substantial long-term liabilities, with pension-related debt exceeding $20 billion. Within this, the teachers' pension system is reportedly funded at only 34.7%, making it one of the most underfunded systems in the country. The deeper concern is not only financial, but also structural trust. When a system struggles to meet obligations to those who have spent their careers serving within it, confidence in the entire framework begins to erode. In recent years, economic growth has slowed significantly, with GDP expansion reported at around 0.7%. This has placed the state in a difficult fiscal position, where any policy direction carries serious trade-offs. If taxes are increased, already among the highest in the country, with average property taxes near $9,800 annually, there is a risk that higher-income residents and businesses may relocate to neighboring states such as Pennsylvania. On the other hand, if spending is reduced, essential public services and social programs could come under immediate strain. These pressures have already manifested in the housing market. New Jersey currently records one of the highest foreclosure rates in the United States, with approximately 1 in every 359 homes undergoing repossession proceedings. Often referred to as the Garden State, New Jersey now faces a far more difficult reality, where rising debt obligations and fiscal constraints are increasingly visible beneath the surface. There is even concern among some observers that, under continued credit tightening and fiscal stress, the state could face conditions more severe than any seen since the Great Depression-era economic crisis. With all 10 states now analyzed, a broader question emerges. How should individuals and families prepare for potential economic shocks that may spread across regions? History suggests that financial crises do not selectively impact only the wealthy or the struggling. They tend to affect systems where economic foundations are either diversified and productive or overly dependent on unstable structures. The patterns observed in states like California, Florida, and New Jersey are often cited as warning signals about speculative growth and structural imbalance.